Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host Henna Zuberi and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. Today we're going to be talking about covering Kashmir. As you know, we air on America's only Muslim-focused TV network. You can watch us 24/7 on Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, and Galaxy 19. Muslim Network TV. Today, my guest is from Kashmir. He's a journalist. He's a young, independent, multimedia producer, digital producer. And he has been, and he's based out of Kashmir and New Delhi. I welcome to the show Raqib Hameed Naik.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Raqib is currently the pro bono news director at twocircles.net. He's formerly worked as an international correspondent with the US-based The Globe Post, and his work has appeared on Al Jazeera. He's written for The Wire, Caravan Magazine, TRT World, and he's covered various aspects of life for Rohingya refugees in India, as well as the Assam detention camps. But a lot of Raqib's work is focused on Kashmir, and he's reported from the ground there. And this is why, aside from his wonderful other work, we really want to have this conversation with him on how hard is it to cover Kashmir. So thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Where did you go to school, and how did you get into covering, doing journalism, especially of human rights issues?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show first. So I live in Dora district, which is actually in Jammu region of Jammu and Kashmir. And for school, I went locally in my district, and then I moved to big city in Jammu and did my high school there. And like any other young man who goes into high school there, so it's in a good school and wants to, of course, they want to be the engineer, doctor, or civil servant. And me too. I mean, back in time, I wanted to be an engineer. But then after high school, I somehow thought of studying arts because I wanted to study political science. I moved to Kashmir in Srinagar district. And I was studying in the college where it was the first time I met Kashmiris, who were from Kashmir. And then I started looking at their daily struggles and the political discussions we had in the class. And of course, those 3 years in Kashmir changed everything for me, because it was the first time that I had a chance to look into the Kashmiri lives through my own eyes, and how they were suffering and how they were being treated by the Indian state. And for many people, there are different outlets. When you see things, you want to speak about them. You want to take some action-oriented step. And for me, it was just the pen. So I chose pen or all other things and decided to tell their stories to the world.
And this is it. That's such and people have to understand that this was not an easy choice for because I really love for you to share what are the sort of challenges journalists face when they cover a region like Jammu and Kashmir.
The challenges, coincidentally, I took up journalism when Modi came to power in India in 2014. I started working as a journalist in 2014. So, I mean, my fellow journalists say there were some good times as well in between, before 2014. But when I started my career, the press freedom in the region has seen a downswing. So it's like a graph that is going down by each passing day, week, and month and year. So, of course, it's a conflict zone, and like any other conflict zone in the world, it's dangerous, very dangerous. But apart from that, press freedom. Apart from that, there are other challenges that you don't find in a conflict zone, because in conflict zone you have to report from the different varying sides. But in Kashmir, the Indian state, how they are trying to trying to sabotage the Kashmir narrative and turn journalists into stenographers. So that's a hard kind of thing to do in Kashmir because
I want to stop you for just a second. What do you mean by turning journalists into stenographers? That's a really powerful.
that is forcing journalists to toe the line because they want to push their narrative that Kashmir is a happy place, nothing is going on in here, people are happy going around with their lives. Journalists are like doing just living normally, doing their work normally, like in any other democracy across the world. But that's, as a journalist, I've covered Kashmir for long, and I feel that's not the reality. The kind of issues we face are immense. The kind of pushback we get from the state for reporting reality from the ground is hard. It's very strong from them, and there is huge presence of security forces. If you go on the ground and try to do stories that state doesn't like, of course you're going to get pushback. But it's the later stage. But while you're reporting from the ground, there are chances that you can be beaten either by the security forces or sometimes, because we have to understand it's such a complicated situation right now down on the ground, that journalists are being seen with suspicion, not just from the state, but from the people as well, because there have been many instances where journalists were beaten by the locals as well, because the kind of journalism that is being peddled by the Indian state the Indian media down there, like they have reporters down there who report the other side, the official narrative. And unfortunately, people think that we journalists are also the part of, because they don't read every newspaper or they don't watch every news channel. So they literally paint everyone with the same brush. So it's very difficult to work on the ground, and the challenges are not, the state is trying to curtail the press freedom. They are curbing the way we are reporting. But when you see all this happening, somehow you also restrain yourself from reporting on the subjects that are critical. So the self-censorship part is also kicking in over the last few years. So it's very difficult and dangerous to work as a journalist in Kashmir right now.
So I'll just tell you that I covered the Muslim community, specifically the post American Muslim community post 9/11, under surveillance by the state, all of that. So one of the things that, and I would love to get your perspective on this and your experiences if you've shared this. It's even hard for the community to trust you, right? So who are you? Why do you want this information from me? Why do you want this quote? How will this information be used? So even calling someone up and saying, hey, I would just like to interview you on this, or I want, you're at an event or at a mosque and you're just asking a question. People can't tell the difference between a journalist and a spy. So I would love to hear about your experiences with that.
That's very true. And when I said that journalists are right now like a punching bag, and they are being seen with suspicion from both the sides, from the people and the state, because for state it is to push their narrative, and for the people it's like, okay, either you're an Indian journalist or working with the Indian mainstream media who is going to show the other side of the story. So I remember in 2016 I went to cover this funeral of a militant in South Kashmir, and while we were covering, people all of a sudden surrounded us and started beating a journalist, and we were lucky enough to escape from the spot. Otherwise we would have been beaten as well. So while they were beating him, they were like telling him, oh, you're the spy, you're either working for the security forces, because lately there has been this practice, like sometimes they'll infiltrate like people with the camera, and it's very hard to tell as a community, because it's such a big community, journalist fraternity. So there are a lot of people working there. Sometimes you see new faces, it's very hard to, but there have been these there have been these attempts as well to malign the whole journalist community in Kashmir by planting few people who really don't know who they are, But ultimately, like, either they are the spies or, like, working for the mainstream media. But to be very honest, Kashmir is such kind of a story. Like, if you are a human, if you're a journalist who believes in ethics, you will of course report. No one is asking you to report just the just the Kashmiri side. What Kashmiris are asking, report us as well. Just give out a balanced picture into us, but into the other side, but into us as well. So they're not just asking for to tell their side of story. They're just telling journalists, tell the truth, show what is happening on the ground to the people outside the world.
So true. So one of the things that you personally have done is you've taken a deeper look at the ecological impact of what has, the effect of the siege on the ecology of Kashmir. So the construction of the Baglihar hydroelectric projects submerged the town of Doda, and you're from Doda, right?
It was Puldora.
Doda. Okay.
Yeah.
Most families were forcibly displaced and their lives descended into chaos. So you covered this in a documentary. Let's watch a trailer of this documentary. So while they're playing that up, and Pul Doda is different from Doda.
हमने वहाँ 20-25 साल हमने वहाँ पे उस घर को बनाया, उसको संवारा, उसकी एक-एक चीज़ों को हमने सजाया, संवारा, लेकिन बाद में जब हमें वहाँ से उठना पड़ा तो काफ़ी मुश्किल हुआ हमें वो, जब वो हमारा घर वहाँ उजड़ गया।
2008 में जब पुलडोडा सबमर्ज हुआ तो हमारे पास बिजनेस का कोई भी सिला नहीं रहा। इतने तक नौबत आ गई कि खुदकुशी करने के भी 3 बार सोचा गया कि खुदकुशी करके ही आप जिंदगी को समाप्त किया जाए।
So tell me more about the documentary. When has it been released? And tell me more about what the subject was.
Yeah, this was released 2 months back on the Third Pole, a UK-based environmental org. I was working on this documentary for the past 1 year, and the dam was commissioned, started in 2008. It was a time when nearly 400 families, nearly more than 1,200 people, they were forcibly displaced as a result of the construction of this dam, because the water levels rose and their whole town, that was the hub of all the business activities in the region, was submerged in the Baglihar Dam. So I try to look at, like, these families, those families who were forcibly displaced, like after a decade of the construction of this dam, what were the human impacts and how people are still suffering now. So when I started, I found 2 very strong characters. One was Jabina and another was Dheeraj. So and especially if you see there is one Muslim, another is Hindu. So all these this was just, I had done it deliberately to show, like, because right now we're living in such a polarized polarized society, that it is to show. Because if I would have shown the Muslim side, they would have been like, oh, it's okay, it's easy to pass off the buck because only Muslim. But no, all these projects are equally affecting every community. So they had suffered, like, even after they were doing good. They had big houses down there, they had good businesses, earning very well, but a decade after construction of this dam, they were struggling. One family literally had to move to a distant village. Like, they had 5 rooms, big house, and imagine living in a village that doesn't even have internet facility, no mobile phone connectivity. You have to walk on foot for like 3 hours to reach that village, and you're just crammed in a single room, 5 members of a family living in one room. And they have a kitchen that is makeshift kitchen. So, and the other guy, he owned a big shop. He run a pharmacy back in time, and now he's running roadside stalls selling tea and snacks. So, and the stories were like too strong and too. I mean, I was very sad. Like, if anyone who looks at the documentary, they will understand, like, the grave, the enormous human costs that are associated with construction of these dams. But this is just one dam. So my whole idea was that this is not about the Bagliha Dam. It is about the dams that are being constructed in the region, and it's just one dam. And right now, I did my own research, and I found that Indian government is constructing nearly 50 small and big dams in the region.
Wow.
And
that effect, and these are over the Chenab River.
And there are over the different rivers, Chenab, Jhelum, and other rivers. So both in Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh, all the three regions, they're constructing these dams. But what is surprising is the region I live in, Dora. So it falls under Chenab Valley. So under Chenab Valley, there are three districts: Ramban, Kishtwar, and Dora. In the small district and within the radius of nearly 120 kilometers, they're constructing more than 12 dams, 12 big dams. And imagine what are going to be the ecological costs of it, environmental costs, human costs. Thousands of people are going to be kicked out of their homes. And I have also, during my research, also found that there has been a great environmental impact for sure, but apart from that, there has been a huge increase in the seismic activity in the region. That's post 2014, and it is, of course, the result of this dam. And no one is going to write. There was one study, but I think that was taken down because no one wants to, of course, government would not want people to hear the truth, how this is going to impact their region in long term. So, I mean, these are I would say these are the power catch, sitting power catch in the region. And in long term, it is going to play havoc.
So that we have a question from the audience. What is the reaction on this dam from the NGOs in India that were speaking against the Narmada project? Did it get much attention?
Back in no one spoke about it. But after my documentary was published by the third pole, there were news reports, especially Kashmiri newspapers and in Pakistani newspapers, and also TRT World did a piece on, especially focusing on how this dam, particularly Bagliha Dam, was built at enormous human cost and environmental cost. But from the Indian civil society and especially these NGOs, I mean, they didn't spoke about it and about the other dams, other big dams that are being constructed in the region. Because when I say Bagliha Dam, my documentary is not just about one dam, not Bagliha. It is about all dams that are being constructed in the region. So of course, I mean, as far as I know, I have never heard a word from them. I mean,
so progressive, except for Kashmir, right?
Yeah, and also we need to understand the other thing, that Kashmir is such a complicated conflict zone, and most of the media focus remains on human rights abuses by the security forces or other political stories, and we have missed this important story. This is under the carpet. We are not discussing. And when people are being kicked out of their houses, being forcibly displaced, this is also a human rights violation. No one is talking about this human rights violation, and this is being silently pushed. So, I mean, it's important for people, especially government, they have to take, they can't be so reckless,
Exactly. You also covered a story of little Asifa, the 80-year-old who was raped and murdered in Jammu. And that was also a story that normally is not covered because she was not from, she was a I don't know the correct
tribal community.
Tribal community, exactly. Yeah. So, what was that experience like? And can you share with us what are some of the aspects of the story that you wanted to highlight that others hadn't highlighted?
Yeah, sure. It was a kind of a story. Like when I first heard about the rape and murder of that girl, I mean, it was very emotionally draining because, I mean, I would have never thought of like, this happening somewhere in our region because, you know, I mean, this was such an emotionally charged moment for me when I heard about that girl being raped. And after that, I decided to look into it, like, what was really going on. And I spoke to one local activist, like, who was very vocal about holding an inquiry in this case, and he was the first person, Chaudhry Talib. So he was the first person who brought out like different angles that this was a part of larger conspiracy being hatched by the Hindutva orgs or people associated with Hindutva to drive away these Muslim tribals from their region. And this rape and murder was used as a tool to intimidate the larger community. So, and back in time, like those days, no one was talking about it. Mainstream would never cover it. It was just the later stage when mainstream came into, and this case became such an international issue. But I started covering when no one was looking at it, except few journalists, and especially I would mention brother Nazir Masoodi from the NDTV. He did a very wonderful, great job. He kept following it up. So I remember, and Greater Kashmir is a very popular newspaper in Kashmir. And back then, this was a local regional paper. So I did this interview with Chaudhry Talib and ran it exclusive on Greater Kashmir. And where he mentioned, like, I specifically, during the interview, I asked him about all these questions, like, why would they do it? He even mentioned the names. And imagine 6 months later, the name Sanji Ram, who he mentioned in that interview, he was later implicated in the case, and he was actually the mastermind. So we knew, like, 5 months back, 6 months back, that who the people were involved in this gruesome rape and murder. And what was a larger conspiracy? What was the larger plan behind the rape and murder of this 8-year-old kid? Yeah. So.
And what was the reaction even from Indian from India itself? Because was this rape discussed as a part of the larger rape culture that perpetuates in India, or was it put aside because it was a little tribal girl from Jammu?
I mean, people felt outraged because, I mean, as far as I remember, people felt outraged after they heard about that girl was raped in a temple. So that actually incited their emotions. If it would have been for a normal tribal girl raped somewhere, no one would care. Because temple was involved. Like, how can they do this inside the temple? It wasn't about that 8-year-old kid being raped. They don't care about Kashmiri lives, especially if she was a tribal. No one gives a damn. But she was raped inside the temple. That, like, aroused their emotions. How can this happen? And after that, this issue was taken up internationally. Like, this happened. But the broader debate that we all missed was that, I mean, this was actually done, this rape and murder, or was planned by the Hindutva people associated with Hindutva groups, and their objective was to kick the Muslim people out of the region, especially the Jammu region, because Jammu is a Muslim majority region now, Hindu majority region. Sorry. So yeah, so that debate we missed, because as I am talking right now, those plans are still going on. Muslims, especially in Jammu region, are being intimidated, being attacked. Like, I would not say on the daily basis, but yeah, even these incidents happen. So yeah, and that's very bad for the overall brotherhood, like, that we used to have back in time in the Jammu region.
So you have seen a change in. I would love to hear about that too. What has the change been in living in that region amongst the communities? What have you seen in just the past 4 years?
There was a time I mean, this was like a normal world we used to live in. And I remember because I was tutored when I was 6. My father brought a tutor home, and he was a Hindu. He was a Hindu and a Dalit.
Mhm.
You know, he used to live at our old place. He stayed with us for nearly next 4 years at our own house. We used to eat together. When he got married, he had any because he had some issues with his family. My father was the one who accompanied him to bring the bride home. He used to stay with us for 4 years. We spent together, and I still remember he used to, because we were kids, he used to give us money to buy candies and all. Our dad would stop us from there because he would say, "Oh, it's bad for your health and all." But he was the one who used to slip money in our pockets and do that. And this was a time I grew up with the Hindu brothers, my Hindu friends, and still we are in touch. But over the last 5 to 6 years, everything has changed. That brotherhood we shared, there is a sense of suspicion among us now. Like, okay, that Muslimness, that Hinduness has come among us. So now the question among us is like whether it's a Hindu or a Muslim, because this whole politics in the region has changed everything, So that person who used to teach us back in time and used to live with us, right now he joined BJP, and 3 years back I heard that he went after the local Muslim villagers with sword, yeah, because he had some political issues with them, and he literally took out his sword and started charging at them. But there were some police case and all. But this is what we have been reduced.
Society has to.
Yeah, it has drastically changed. Now we are just mere either Hindus or Muslims. We are not humans anymore. That brotherhood is all gone.
Brotherhood, the neighborness.
Yeah.
That's extremely difficult to hear, and it's also difficult to understand. Like already living under such extreme pressures, and then I did want to talk about, you have covered mental health effects of the siege and living under constant fear and gunfire for decades. What have you been your findings about the effects of on the mental health of the people of Kashmir?
This was the one piece I did for Caravan magazine, a photo feature essay last year. So Kashmir has been usually covered, like mainland Kashmir, the mental health issues, because of course in any conflict zone you're going to have a large scale of population, majority of population who suffer either from PTSD, trauma, stress, anxiety. But what I did was, because I always try to do stories that are underreported or unreported, so I try to look at like how about the borders as well, because we need to understand this conflict. This is not just restricted to the mainland, but also to the borders, where both Indian and Pakistani armies have to be held responsible for their actions. It's not just India, it's just Pakistani army as well. Because when ceasefire violations happen, it's the people living on the border villages who suffer. So I went to the different borders, line of control, and then I went to the international border on the Jammu side, and found that people were suffering immensely. They had a lot of mental health issues. Most of them had PTSD, they had stress, anxiety. All of a sudden, many of them had seen things that no one should see. Like one young man, he still had like PTSD from the time back in 2003 when he had to collect the body parts of her niece. Like she was 3 to 4 years old. He had to collect her body parts after she was hit by a shell from across the border. That was such a sad thing. And then there was this another girl who was just one, and a shell came from across the border. One splinter hit her feet, and the doctors had to amputate her feet. And since then, she can't walk. The kind of childhood she was supposed to have, she couldn't. So these are the stories that you would find in every corner of the Kashmir. and the borders, of course. So mental health issue is something which has been overlooked for long. But yeah, I mean, the government and especially doctors and the international orgs have to also, like, look into that aspect as well of the conflict.
Of the conflict. Now, it's been a year since the revocation of Article 370 and when Kashmir lost its autonomous status. What are the sentiments of the people on the ground as we speak?
You would have heard a lot of stories, but people are hurt. People feel betrayed. People are still in shock because this was a kind of emotional issue for them. Like, there was a sentiment attached to it. They see their revocation as a direct assault on their identity, on being a Kashmiri. So it's still there. Like, a year has passed. People are still in shock. Like, how can this happen? And not, like, I would say everyone, the people who were before unionists, like, New Delhi loyalists in the region, the regional political parties, they're also in shock because they were assured that this thing is never going to happen. And all of a sudden, they took everything from them that they used to stand for all these decades.
But why was that such a shock? Wasn't this a part of BJP's mandate?
Yes, it was, but no one thought that they would do it. They were like, okay, these guys are bluffing. These guys are just bluffing. They just want to get the Indian votes. But we had to understand, since 2014, this became such an emotional issue for Indian population in the mainland India that there was no option for BJP but to strike it down. And this is also the larger part. We have to see, it's not BJP when I talk about it, it's RSS. That's the ideological partner, parent of the BJP. And they want to turn India into a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu nation. And with Kashmir being a Muslim majority region, they can't do it. So they have to Hinduize Kashmir. And with 370 in place, and with state subject laws that no non-local can come in and buy land, they can't do it. So after revocation of 370, people from outside Jammu and Kashmir can come and buy in land. They can get domicile rights, domicile certificates, and they're getting it. So it's actually a move to change the demography of the region. And it has happened before in 1947 as well, when a massacre took place in Jammu region where nearly, some reports say, between 300,000 to 500,000 Muslims were massacred on the streets. And that really changed the number in the Jammu region.
So this is something like what you're talking about, the change in the region. So when we see reports coming out from the Indian government, and we've seen newsletters being published by the embassies, and being sent out to governments across the world, to diaspora, and the narrative is that Kashmir is developing and there's so much money being pumped into this. So I wanted to talk about a little bit of breaking down that Indian propaganda, the government's propaganda. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about some of specifically things that they have been pumping out. Specifically the effect on businesses and industry in Kashmir. So according to Indian reports, youth programs are being implemented, and the youth of Kashmir are being given jobs, and it's just a much better place to live in. What have you seen in your experience in reporting from Kashmir? What are the effects of the revocation of Article 370 on industry and business?
First of all, I don't know about what kind of jobs they're talking about, because if sitting home and being locked up in your house is a job, then of course 9 million Kashmiris have a job. But since last August 5th, nearly 500,000 people have lost their jobs because there was a communication blackout. Still, there was just 2G working in there. And we live in a time where all the things are dependent on internet. So imagine someone like me who has a newsroom. It's example. Me who has a newsroom in Delhi or in the US or somewhere else, and I have to every day file reports that I'm going to do through internet. If I'm a video journalist, so like 1 GB file, can you send that over 2G? I tried once, and it took me nearly 10 days to do that. So as a journalist, I cannot continue working if I had to work for some international org. Why? Because there is no internet. So of course, ultimately, I'm going to lose my job. It's just one example. The tourism sector, Kashmir is mostly dependent on tourists. Since last August, there are no tourists except few state-sponsored trips that they are arranged for a delegation from Europe, all these ambassadors, to show how good the Kashmir was, how peaceful it was. But apart from them, no other tourists came. I mean, few came, but like, we used to get more than 1 million tourists every year. Since last August, no one got that, and everyone is dependent on that. Hoteliers, restaurants, taxi wallahs, the transportation, all these people, they have the hospitality sector. Everyone have lost their jobs because there is nothing to do. There are no tourists, no money. So how are they going to earn? And transporters, like this continuous lockdown. First, it was the Article 370 lockdown, and now it's the coronavirus lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Transporters, there are no people on the streets. Transporters can't work, and some of them literally have to sell their buses in scrap, because they owe loans to the banks, right? They have been able to pay their installments since last year because they're not able to work. And those buses are old. They can't, to feed their families, they're literally selling their buses to the scrap dealers.
They've reported billions of dollars in losses. One of the things that was reported in this embassy newsletter was the Prime Minister's development package helps farmers in Jammu and Kashmir, and this was touted as the 2015 PM Modi's development program has been a lifeline for the farmers in the Union Territory. That's what they claim. So now, it has helped increase apple production. Now, this is something. Apple production is one of the lifelines, that's true, of the valley. But what has happened to apple production in the past year?
I mean, I don't know why they're offshore apples as well now. I mean, to be honest, apple production since last year, because there was no transportation. And there are no storage houses, as you have in the other part, because it's an underdeveloped region. So people lost their crops. Apples, they were left out to spoil, they couldn't sell it because there was no transportation. Because these apple producers, literally, a normal apple producer will earn maybe, let's say, $10,000 to $20,000 a year per season. But last year, if people who could send them across, they were just earning maybe $4,000 to $7,000 or $6,000, and that's not enough to sustain the whole year. And you have spent so much money and time on growing apples itself, to buy fertilizers, to take good care of them. So people literally are running in losses right now. I don't know what profits or what these special packages they are talking about, but as far as I know, these farmers have suffered immensely. Everyone living in Kashmir has suffered immensely. And what is problematic, the part that is problematic to me, is the denial. When they say we helped them and we did this, we did that, they're not actually painting a picture that is correct. Actually, or they're not trying to count their achievements. They're actually trying to deny things, because these are denials, because the reality on the ground is different.
The reality on the ground is different. One of the things that is also been touted is the response to COVID-19 in that region, where the Kashmir, one of the things that was said was the Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program also took advantage. Kashmir youth have taken advantage of this to combat COVID-19. Now, we see pictures of ambulances not being able to get from one point to another point because of security forces and wires running through the cities. What has been your experience in the health sector, covering the health sector in Kashmir? Have you covered it? Is this something that you're familiar with?
Yes, I did not cover, but as a journalist, we usually stay updated. And my friend did cover stories on health sector. It's the same tragedy again. The government says they are prepared for every eventuality. They are prepared for everything. But now, when you see every day, when Kashmir is recording, Jammu and Kashmir is recording more than 1,300 cases each day, you can imagine, like, I mean, what the health sector is doing now. They are saying that they're conducting lots of tests and they are ready for everything, but I don't think that they're ready, because one of my friends who did a story back a couple of months back, there were only, there were only nearly 100 ventilators in Kashmir's top hospital. So 100 ventilators, and you have 6 million Kashmiris. So, like, so that's the thing. And it's not just the Kashmiri story that health infrastructure is so weak. It's the story across India, like every other state. I think, to be very honest, we are still in the better position when it comes to comparison with the other Indian states. But yeah, and Kashmir is like, a place. It's huge. Like, there are houses are built at distance. It's not that cramped. People are not living in cramped conditions. So the spread of COVID is like a little bit. The community transmission, large-scale community transmission, is difficult, but still challenges are there. People are struggling to get their tests done, and the biggest problem is that state is also looking this COVID thing as a security issue, because when you impose lockdowns, when you forcefully quarantine people, when you impose lockdowns on your will, so you see it as kind of, because back they deal in the same, like, when they're using the same security stick to deal with the COVID situation as well. So I mean, I don't think that is going to help in the long term. But for now, at least Kashmir, we don't see a large scale community transmission in Kashmir. But yeah, in coming weeks and months, it'll be very important to see how that fares.
One of the things that I know is your regular beat is you've covered Rohingya in India, and specifically in Jammu. And this is something that we're very concerned about, as everybody knows here on Justice for All. We run Burma Task Force. We've been a major voice for the Rohingya people here in the United States and across the world, and pushing towards calling it a genocide, as it should be called. Now, a lot of people don't even know that they're Rohingya in India, or they're Rohingya in Jammu. So tell us how many there are there. What have you observed in your coverage of them? This is one of your regular beats.
Yes. There are nearly 40,000 Rohingya refugees living in India. And for the first time I covered that story was in 2014 for Two Circles. And since then, I've been regularly following their stories. And I remember, because 2014 was the time when Modi came to power, and still, like, the tempers, polarization was there, but it wasn't that upfront. It wasn't that visible. And they were doing good. They had, they were living with their normal lives. Locals were not that hostile. But after 2014, the kind of hostility against Rohingya I have seen, I mean, it's alarming. And I believe, if for Rohingyas, if there is a chance of like a massacre outside Burma to happen, it's in India, because the right-wing leaders have been targeting them. Like T. Raja, who is a BJP MLA from Hyderabad, he said that if you don't expel, if you don't kick out these Rohingyas from India, we're going to shoot them. And there were statements from chambers, Jammu chambers of commerce back in 2017 and 18, that in Jammu, that if you don't kick them out, if you don't send them out of the country, out of the region, they're going to, like, go to their colonies and kill them. Like, then don't blame us, whatever actions we are taking, we will take against them. So there is a huge threat they are facing. from the Hindutva groups who are targeting them day in and day out and seeking, asking the government, pushing them to send them back to Burma, because their problem is just because they're Muslims. It's not just they're refugees, they're eating up their economy. They work in informal sectors. They work as a cheap labor. That's the cheap labor available for them. Like if they have to hire someone local to do that job, he will charge, let's say, $10. But if it's Rohingya, he will charge $5. So they're not eating up their economy or anything. The only problem they have with them is just because they are Muslims.
And do they get refugee status in India?
No, they just get a card from UNHCR, and to be honest, they have not been doing. If they would have been, those refugees would have been in any other part of the world, like let's say West Europe or the US, they wouldn't treated very better. Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't taken very good care. But in the region, I mean, they are being overlooked, especially in India, like across India. They live in slums, which are cramped, unhygienic. They don't have proper toilets, and in like sweltering heat, in the summer heat, they live in a hut made of tin, and it's like a hot furnace inside. When you go inside, you literally sweat. You literally sweat to death. So
It's so terrible. They've suffered so much, and then to now in a place where they've taken refuge to be under constant threat over there.
And the part is they don't have anywhere to go. Like when you go and talk to them, like many times I spoke to them, like, okay, if this thing happens, they ask you guys to pick up your stuff and go out. What will you do? And the answer is, where do we have to go? We don't have a home. It's like a death. Either we die here or we die back in Burma. So it's better for us to die here itself than taking this long voyage back to Burma and get shot by the Burmese army. So it's better to die.
What do you think that needs to be done? What can be done for them
I think
in the international community?
Immediately we need to take notice of the kind of statements that are being issued by the Hindutva groups and the people associated with the BJP in India, because trust me, it's just a matter of time before they're going to get tarred, because for them they are just the numbers. They're not human for them, because they have used dehumanizing language against them. For them, there are termites, rats, eating up their economy. So we should be really concerned, and it's the time that when we talk about refugees, the Rohingya refugees living in other parts of the world, especially in Bangladesh, and the genocide of Rohingyas in Burma, we also have to, at the same time, we also have to talk about the potential threat they are facing in India as well, and to make sure that no harms come their way.
And this is something that, it's just terrifying that when refugees do not have that, even though we have international laws that protect displaced people. We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to talk to you quickly about your own, like a few days, actually yesterday, I saw a tweet on your Twitter handle where you talked about as a response to the young man killed in Sopore in Kashmir, in Kashmir, in custodial, and it's being called a custodial killing. You had tweeted a response based on your family's own history with these forces. Can you share a little bit more about if it's safe and if it's okay for you to do that, what has your family gone through and your interactions with the Indian Army?
I mean, yesterday when I came to know about what happened in Sopore, a young man, police is saying that he was running away. He escaped from the custody and died. He fell on a stone and died. But family is saying that he was killed in the custody and he had torture marks all over his body. So whenever I hear about custodial killing, especially in Kashmir, it always reminds me of my father. When I was 6 in 1998, he was picked up from home, and like the army thought that he was a militant sympathizer, OGW, but he was not, of course, because our family has suffered from the both sides, like it's different sides. Because in conflict, non-combatants are at the receiving ends. Those people who are the civilians, they are at the receiving end. So yesterday when I retweeted and shared my story, like, back in time that happened, and he was taken away for 3 days. He was beaten up, beaten black and blue inside the custody. And I still remember, I was 6. That day I remember when he was, because locals intervened, and then we got to know that he will be released. And when I still remember when he was supposed to release. My mom told me to get some new clothes and go to this particular spot, and so that he can wear, because all his clothes were not like fine, because he was in their custody for 3 days. I remember taking my clothes, and they didn't let me see him first. They just gave him the clothes, and when he came out, he was all fresh, like, wearing new clothes, but his body was all bruised, like, I still remember that. So that was the story I share, and I think not me, every Kashmiri has a story to tell, because it's a kind of baggage that we carry, because it's a kind of trauma that we're going to carry for the rest of our lives. And that I shared, but after I sharing that, my family got a lot of calls from the army yesterday in the region. They were inquiring like what happened and all. And then I also called one of the numbers I took from my father, and I called the army officer, and he told me like, we're just inquiring and all what happened. We just wanted to, like, and I told him like, okay, I was wondering that you were going to do an inquiry into the incident maybe after 22 years, but then I realized they were just inquiring my statement, because yeah, they're just inquiring if it was, because recently Jammu and Kashmir government passed a media policy that allows state to that gives power to state to take action against, to decide on what is fake news and what is not.
Okay.
So any journalist who says something, if state feels that, okay, this is not something that we should be happy with, they can call it a fake news and then take action against the journalist. So they were just checking my statement if it was true or not. But then I told him, of course, in a lighter note, that I'm not Arnab Goswami to cook up everything. It's something we believe in ethics. So this was my story. This was my trauma. And then he was like, yeah, you guys have freedom of speech and expression. I was like, yeah, I hope so.
I hope so.
I hope
that hasn't been the case for the journalists who have been booked under the UPA, the 2 journalists that have been booked under that.
Yeah. Masar Zara, one of my colleagues, and Gawar Gilani is my friend, a very good journalist, like one of the prominent voices from the region, excellent person. He was also booked under UPA just because they criticized government on the social media. So yeah, this was also the social media. They took note of it and started making, and it was not just one officer. They were like calling like from right and left, literally 7 to 8 calls from different brigades. Okay, if you have any clarification, just make one call and clarify it. But when you have so many people calling, it also gives pressure to you, like, okay, next time whether you should go ahead and talk. Because it's also intimidating, like, I see this as an intimidating tactic, so that journalists next time they speak up, they know, like, okay, this can escalate. Like, this time it's calls, next time it can be something else. And this is not just my first brush with the security forces. There were a lot of times. In 2015, I was beaten while I was covering protests in Maisuma, Srinagar, and in 2016 in Kakapura, Pulwama, me and my colleague were literally saved. Otherwise, we would have been hit with pellets as well. Pellets did hit us, but not like on the face, but down the body, pellet guns. So actually, we missed that topic, but yeah, of course.
That's another issue of covering in Kashmir, is being hit by pellet guns and being blinded by that. So thank you so much, Raqib, for being here today. There's so much more that we could talk about, and so much more to learn from you, even even as a young journalist, having done so much work and so much difficult and and powerful work. Thank you. And it takes a lot of courage to be here today, like just and being able to speak, knowing that you have to go back and you have family there. So we really appreciate it, and don't take this as a minor. When we pray for you and pray for your people, and hope to keep doing what we can over here to make sure that the spotlight does not move from Kashmir.
Yeah, I hope good senses prevail very soon down in Indian Kashmir, and yeah, I hope peace returns to the valley, and people would go on and live their normal lives like any other person living across the world. So I hope so, inshallah. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for being here, and for everybody else. Thank you for your time and just wanted to let you know we have a Kashmir Action report out, a rebuttal to the propaganda that has been put out by the Indian government, which has been done by Kashmiri researchers. And we really wanted to please head over and watch that. Take a look at that report on justiceforall.org. And please do keep signing and sharing that petition to stop Disney from profiteering off of the Uyghur genocide. Thank you so much, and assalamu alaikum.